that we have got to get the help to the weak working class that needs that help. And I'm not going to hold my breath about this. And again, I want to give the president some time. But at the end of the day, if the weak working class is not shored up, we still got a problem in America.
Tavis Smiley, the comments of another first, of Eric Holder, the first African-American attorney general in this country, during a speech in Black History Month. He talked about this nation as being a nation of cowards for not discussing the history of U.S. racism more openly. Do you agree?
Yes, he told the truth. Every one of us has the right to choose our own language, and some of us, some persons might not have used the word coward or cowardly or any derivative thereof. But at the end of the day, the evidence abounds that we do not like, we are not comfortable discussing the issue of race in America. It is the very reason that the mainstream media was so quick to try to promulgate this notion of living in a post-racial America just because we have a black man in the White House. As I said earlier, or intimated earlier, America may be less racist, but we're not post-racial. Clearly, a lot of white folk voted for Barack Obama to be in the White House. Black folk couldn't have done that alone. So America may be less racist, and I celebrate that, obviously, but we're not post-racial. And Eric Holder was right to suggest, in his language, that we just aren't comfortable having the discussion of race in the most multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic America ever. I don't know what the brouhaha was all about that. He told the truth. Many of us live in cities that are too segregated. The evidence in housing, in employment, environmental racism you discussed earlier on this program at the summit that took place in Washington this past weekend. And Van Jones talks powerfully about how we have to green the ghetto first. He and Majora Carter. The evidence abounds that racism is still the most intractable issue in this country, and many of us, most Americans, like to stay in our own corners. We don't want to venture out. Many of us don't have a circle of friends that includes people of color, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and we want to act like Eric Holder was playing politics, that he was being provocative, that he wasn't telling the truth. He told the truth, and I just don't get all the brouhaha. The truth will set us free if we're willing to deal with it.
Tavis, I wanted to ask you about the latest news that the Obama administration has announced the United States will boycott the World Conference Against Racism in Geneva next month unless its final document drops all references to Israel and reparations for slavery. We were just talking last week on Democracy Now! To Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, the former head of the UN Human Rights Commission, who was one of the heads of the Durban Conference 1 that happened right before the September 11th attacks when the U.S. walked out. What's your response?
I think it's a mistake. We have a bad and spotty track record as the United States of America of boycotting too many of these conferences and boycotting for the wrong reasons. I don't know how in the world that we can justify boycotting a world conference on racism, as I said a moment ago, when in this country, racism is still the most intractable issue in America. It is, quite frankly, a disappointment.
Do you support reparations?
I support reparations. The question is, how do we define reparations? And you don't get to these conversations by boycotting, and that's the point of why you have to show up and engage in dialogue. And so the answer to reparations is about how, in my mind at least, Amy, we define it. Do I support giving a check to every black person in America? No. Do I support giving us 40 acres and a mule like they originally promised? No. Or talked about at least. No, that's not the answer. But there has to be a concerted, concentrated, laser-like focus on the African-American community, given the legacy of white supremacy that we still see playing itself out 400 years later, even after the election of an African-American president. And so, yes, I support reparations, depending on how we define it. Education vouchers, yes. Housing opportunities, yes. There's so many issues on which we need to get some traction where black people specifically are concerned, since that's what tends to come up when we talk about reparations. But for me, it's about how we define it. To the first issue about Israel, this is a tricky and thorny situation But let me just be clear about this, as clear as I can be, at least, very quickly here. Israel is an important ally. I think in this last round of fighting, they did a less than admirable job of calibrating the use of their power in this latest round of fighting. Every powerful country, every country with weaponry, including us as compared to Iraq, including Israel as compared to Palestine, has got to be clear and considerate about how they calibrate the use of that power. And I don't think Israel did a good job of that the last time around. And yet I recognize that they are an important and strategic ally, and I don't begrudge the relationship that we have with them in the region. Our problem is that I think we're starting to lose the capacity to be an honest broker in this process of bringing peace, given how we treat one side as compared to how we treat the other side. Given that the Bush administration didn't even want to really engage this process, we have got to be honest brokers, and we do that by seeing the world as it is, not necessarily as we want it to be. And for both of those reasons, on Israel and on reparations, it's tragic and I think shameful that here we are again boycotting a conference that we ought to be at. You don't make progress by not talking. And it seems a bit inconsistent with candidate Obama's talk about Iran, for example. And remember the fighting that he and Hillary had about the conditions for who you would talk to and when you would talk? Many of us celebrated President Obama for a position of being willing to show up and talk. And that ought to be the case with this conference.
Tavis Smiley, finally, the traveling exhibit that you have going across the country, talk about what it is.
It's called America I Am, the African-American imprint. It is the first exhibit of its kind to ever, Amy, comprehensively tell the contributions, the story, that is, of the contributions that African-Americans have made to this country. We just wrapped, of course, African-American Black History Month. The great black intellectual many, many years ago, W.B. Du Bois, asked this question: would America have been America without her Negro people? You start extracting the blackness out of America, there goes Barack Obama, there goes your Motown soundtrack, there goes Jackie Robinson, there goes Muhammad Ali, there goes Ralph Bunche. I could do this all day. America simply would not be the country that she is, no Thurgood Marshall, without the contributions of African Americans. And this exhibit tells the almost 500-year journey that we have been on in this part of the world to help make America the great country that she is. Over 300 artifacts, 12 galleries, 4 theaters, 15,000 square feet of space. The exhibit will change your life. It's now at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia through May the 3rd. June the 7th, we head to Atlanta, then to Los Angeles, then to New York. It's traveling, Amy, for 4 years. All the details at AmericaIam.org. But it's an exhibit that you have to see, and I promise you, it'll change your life or your money back.
Tavis Smiley, I want to thank you for being with us. I know you have to head to that plane. Tavis will be at the Borders Columbus Circle tonight, hopefully at 7 o'clock, for his book, Accountable: Making America as Good as Its Promise. You can go to our website at democracynow.org for details. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.